UFC Fight Night, Strickland versus Magomedov. We have a decent card this weekend. Main event being between Sean Strickland and Abus Magomedov. Kind of a bizarre main event for considering one of the guys has one fight in the UFC entirely, but a pretty exciting one nonetheless. Certainly has some impact on the middleweight contention, so that should be a good one. I'm going to go through all the fights here and break down each of them, giving them my picks and predictions for each fight, starting off with Alexander Romanov versus Blagoy Ivanov, two big boys. Alexander Romanov, a guy whose hype train got derailed as fast as anyone you'll see. He was like 16-0, I think, just going around tossing guys to the ground. He has crazy grappling, and then came in versus Marcin Tybura and was just looking big. And he's always big, but he was looking fat. Came in at like 264 when he's usually weighing in at like 240s or so. So that was alarming. And he came in and he just could not take down Romanov. Could not take down Tybura, and that was basically the story of that fight. Fast forward to he has a chance to redeem himself versus Volkov, and gets knocked out. So that's Romanov. On the other hand, we have Blagoy Ivanov. He's a guy who's been around the block. He's got wins over Marcos Rodrigo de Lima, losses to Derek Lewis and Tybura. Former Sambo champ, he beat Fedor back in the day. I think that's a really fun fact about the guy. So just to show you the type of guy that at one point he used to be, but still definitely is solid in his own right. Heavyweights, they kind of have that longer lifespan. And really going into this one, I said if Alexander Romanov weighs in at less than like 245 pounds, I'm throwing the house on him. And then he comes in today and weighs in at like 264, looking real fluffy. And that's really all I needed to hear. So I'm taking Blagoy in this one. I think he'll win this one by decision. Romanov is going to have to definitely get some things figured out from like a nutrition standpoint. Not sure what's going on with that. But I guess we'll see if he can keep a pace at the higher weight. I don't really see it happening though. Next up is a women's flyweight fight between Ivana Petrovic and Luana Carolina. Petrovic is 6-0. She's the 2-1 favorite here. Undefeated prospect. And then you have Luana on the other side, who's been in the UFC. She's 2-3 in her last 5 with wins over Lupi, and she lost to Molly McCann and Joanna Wood. My philosophy really has been fade the women's prospects when they're making their UFC debut, especially if they're a big favorite like this one. We're getting good value. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to take Luana Carolina probably just to win by decision in this one. It's just a strategy that's worked out well for me in the past. Watching Ivana, she's got decent grappling, but nothing so crazy where I think she can dominate Luana on the ground or anything. I just don't see a path for her to really have any distinct advantage over Luana in this one. So it's fade the newcomers unless they're Shavkat's sister, in which case we're throwing the house on her because she's probably an animal. Next up is a lightweight fight between Guram Kutateladze, and he's taking on Elves Brener. Guram is the heavy favorite in this one. Only had 2 fights in the UFC. He's 1-1 with win versus Gamrot in his UFC debut, and then most recently lost to Damir. Guram's really struggled getting out there. This is his first fight in some time. And then you have Elves Brener, on the other hand, won his debut versus Tukagov. He is the 4-1 underdog in this one. He comes from Brazil. He's got 11 submission wins and then has decent striking on top of it, does Brener. but not the best gas tank. Guram, on the other hand, oodles of potential. Definitely one of like the guys who's been labeled a dark horse contender for some time now. Basically just riding off the legacy of that win over Gamrot, especially seeing how much success Gamrot has had since. Guram's got great striking. His kicks are really crazy. I think he's got might be the hardest kicker in the division, just about. And then he's got good grappling on top of that. Really stuffed basically all of Gamrot's takedowns, and if he did get taken to the ground, he gets up right away. I think the gas tank is going to be the big difference maker here, even though Guram hasn't been the most active fighter. When he comes, he's got quite a gas tank, and I think he's going to find a third round finish in here. We've just seen Elves Brener gas out late in fights before, and he can't afford to do that versus Guram. So I think Guram gets a third round KO. Really excited for that one though, because he's a guy who really, I think they could thrust him up the rankings pretty quick, just given how good he is. And then he has that Hamzat connection too, which doesn't hurt either. Next up is a women's featherweight fight. We have Yana Santos taking on Karol Rosa. Yana Santos usually fights at 135. Karol Rosa is the more natural 145-pounder. That's really all I got to hear. Santos got out-grappled by Holly Holm. Now she's moving up a weight class. I think Karol Rosa just grapples her way to a decision win here. So Karol Rosa is the pick here. She's a slight favorite in this one, so I'm guessing most people are thinking the same. Next up is a featherweight fight between Joanderson Brito and Westin Wilson. Brito is 3-1 in the UFC. He's coming off of a few very impressive performances. Had a massive KO versus Andre Fili, and then just got another finish on top of that. Lost to Bill Algeo, but he's facing a guy in Westin Wilson who's making his UFC debut and has really, just looking at the guys he's fought, has not been fighting the most impressive guys. I think Brito by KO is basically a lock here. Wilson has not faced a guy with the power of Brito in his career, and I think he's going to learn pretty quick that it's different when you get to the UFC. So Brito by KO is the pick here. I really cannot see this going any other way besides maybe Brito rocking Wilson and then subbing him. Next up is a welterweight fight between Kevin Lee and Rinat Fakhretdinov. Kevin Lee making his triumphant return to the UFC. Most recently fought for Khabib's promotion, where he got a decision win over Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez, of course, he's UFC vet guy who was the man back in the day, but by the time he was fighting Kevin Lee most recently, he had that weird trainer, that whole situation. The guy was like doing yoga to train for fights. I don't even know. So not the biggest win for Lee, but and definitely Kevin Lee, it's a big question of, how locked in is he, but he did come in looking jacked at the weigh-ins. Fakhretdinov, he's 2-0 in the UFC. He's got wins over Michailidis and Kenny Battle. There's his name, Kenny Battle. Let me just confirm that name. Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking, but Rinat, he's a guy who's gonna try and take you down and smother you. He's got something like 30 minutes of control time in his 2 fights, so that shows you exactly what his strategy is here. He's not the most impressive fighter on the feet, but he's just got the gas tank and he's strong as heck. So I definitely say he's one-dimensional. This fight for me comes down to how locked in Kevin Lee is and just where he's at in his training and approach to fighting. Definitely not going to be as good as he once was, who is when you get up there in age, but I think Kevin Lee has a big opportunity here to stop a guy who's only has one career loss and is on like a massive win streak. I'm surprised the odds honestly aren't more extreme, with Rinat only being a 2-1 favorite here. But if we were getting better value on Kevin Lee, something like 2.5 or 3-1, I'd probably be all over that. But at just plus 170, I think Rinat is. I think he's gonna win this fight more often than not to justify that 2-1 pricing. So I think he gets a decision win here. And he is the pick. Next up is a middleweight fight between Brunno Ferreira, Hulk, and Nursulton Ruziboev. Hulk is my guy. I mean, I'm just going to say that. I am not unbiased at all in this. I'm very much so biased in Brunno. I took him versus RoboCop kind of, I was very confident about that play despite RoboCop being like a 3-1 favorite in that one. I just thought Hulk, he's a big guy, not the tallest for the middleweight division, but he's built. He's got decent grappling, comes from like a more judo background, and then his striking just seems to be improving every fight. He's 10-0. He's got that big KO win over RoboCop. He didn't just win, he went out there and shut his lights off. On the other hand, you have Nursulton, who's a guy, he's 34, 8-2 in his career, but he's not even 30 years old, I don't think. So he's got a wealth of experience. He's the taller guy, about like 4 inches, but he's a bit scrawnier. Weighed in at like 183.5. Not sure how you really want to interpret coming under the weight limit. I don't know if that's just he had a really more of an aggressive approach to the weight cut, and he will be coming in a lot bigger, but part of me worries if that's just kind of his weight. It works for him for Izzy, for example, but this guy is not Izzy. So I think Hulk smashes in this one. I'm taking Brunno by KO finish in this one, and really excited to see where his career goes next. He was scheduled to fight Abdul Razak Al Hassan, which I think was just the best matchup ever, but this should be a fun one as well. Next up is a lightweight fight between Ismael Bonfim and Benoit Saint-Denis. Bonfim, he is 2-0 in the UFC, really exploded onto the scene most recently, though, with that KO win over Terrence McKinney. Really was telling about how highly touted of a prospect he was just by the fact of him getting Terrence McKinney in his debut. He pretty much dominated that entire fight. McKinney looked kind of lost just because Ismael Bonfim is so good of a counter striker. McKinney didn't really know how to handle the patience of Bonfim. That was really the most impressive part for me. Bonfim was so content to just let McKinney throw, and then he countered him every time. And McKinney, for me, is a guy who I think has as much potential as anyone. So that really was an impressive win for Bonfim. Benoit Saint-Denis, on the other hand, he's 2-1, with his one loss being to Eliseo dos Santos. Selecki dos Santos, I think his name is. He's a guy who's a more natural 170er, so that loss is a bit more forgivable. Saint-Denis, good French prospect. He's a brawler, though, and I just don't see that working against a guy as experienced and polished as Bonfim. Bonfim is not going to brawl with you. He's going to stay patient. He's going to pick his shots, and he's going to figure out when a guy like Saint-Denis puts himself into bad positions and capitalize on them. So I think Bonfim gets a KO in this one. Saint-Denis got hit a lot in his last fight, and if he gets hit by similar shots from Bonfim, he's going out. So I think it's kind of a shame they don't throw Bonfim's brother on the same card. I thought that was so hyped that you got the double Bonfim bandits on the same card. So UFC, if you're listening to this, schedule these guys at the same time. I just think it's fun. But let's keep it moving. We're going to a flyweight fight between Ariane Lipski and Melissa Gatto. Lipski is the plus 180 underdog in this one. She's 2-3 in her last 5, with 3 of those losses all being KOs. Gatto, on the other hand, is 2-1. She's coming off of a loss to Tracy Cortez, but really that number for me, being KO'd 3 times out of your last 5, is really all I needed to see here. Gatto has pretty decent striking, not sensational. She's more of like a well-rounded fighter. I don't think she KOs Lipski, but I think she gets a decision win here. Getting KO'd 3 times in the women's flyweight division is just really concerning for me. And I think Gatto has the goods to get a win over Lipski in that one. Next up is a welterweight fight between Max Griffin and Michael Morales. Max Griffin is a guy, older fighter. I think he's in his late 30s. Has put together a solid run, 4-1 in his last 5. He's got wins over Tim Means, Carlos Condit, San Canan, and a loss to Neil Magny in his second most recent fight. Morales, on the other hand, is undefeated with 3 wins. He's got a win over Adam Fugit, Trevin Giles. He's the large favorite in this one at minus 240, and I think for good reason. Morales is very explosive, very good striking with just one-punch KO power. He's still a bit raw. He's only 24, but I think he's been showing that he's making improvements each fight. Adam Fugit, that was an impressive win for me because that dude is just tough and took everything that Morales could give him, and Morales was still able to get a finish against that guy. Is really just as tough as they come. Max Griffin is solid, but I think this is a poor matchup for him. Griffin is pretty KO dependent with like 9 of his wins coming from KO, and I just don't think he KOs Morales here. If they get into a firefight, Morales is going to find that chin quicker, and he's going to find that off button quicker, certainly. So I think Morales gets a KO in this one, especially if Griffin sells out for a KO. It's going to be really interesting to see where Morales can go from here if he gets the win. Definitely one of those highest touted prospects in that welterweight division. I put him a tier below, I'd say JDM and like Ian Gary, but he definitely has as much potential as anyone. And he puts on for Ecuador. I think it's really cool. Like if they have him and Cheeto, 2 guys who can both break into contention, coming from a country that just does not have a lot of MMA representation in the UFC, could be really cool. Let's keep it going to our co-main event. Is a lightweight fight between Damir Ismagulov, and he is taking on Grant Dawson. Ismagulov is the ever so slight favorite, although this one could just become a pick'em by the time of the fight. He's got a win over Guram Kutateladze, Thiago Moises, but he's coming off of a loss versus Arman Sarukian. Grant Dawson, on the other hand, he's 4-0-1 in his last 5 with wins over Mark Madsen and Jared Gordon. Ismagulov, he's a guy who, at his best, is actually as good as anyone. I mean, I think I might have said that a couple times about a few guys already in this video, but it is very true of Damir, especially like coming off of that Kutateladze fight. Looked like, he could try for like the lightweight championship right then and there. I mean, the guy is just, has a lot of fights, only had lost 1 time up until that point. But then I remember he had like a bizarre tweet talking about how he was going to retire, and then he sort of reneged on that, saying, I'm just going to finish out my contract. So he does have some question marks going into this. took on Arman Tsarukyan most recently and did all right, but Arman really just ended up physically dominating him throughout that fight, just out-grappled him the entire time, and Damir just really didn't have an answer for the grappling of Arman. Grant Dawson does have great grappling in his own right, but definitely not on the same level as a guy like Arman Tsarukyan. Grappling definitely is Dawson's bread and butter. He doesn't have the greatest striking, and I think he's struggled a bit in his lightweight career, I guess you could say. He was fighting at 145 for a while, and I think was missing weight, but at 145, the dude was just ragdolling people. Hasn't been able to get away with that as much at 155, but he definitely proved a lot in his win versus Mark Madsen, who is an Olympic level grappler. I think he he medaled in Greco-Roman or something. So that's definitely a big plus for Dawson going into this fight. For me, it's really up to Ismagulov. If Ismagulov was, the same guy he was who fought Kutateladze, I would take him in a heartbeat. I'm not as sure now. He looked pretty locked in at weigh-ins, so I'm just going to base it on that, and I'm going to take Ismagulov by decision here. I think he's got the grappling defense to thwart most of Grant Dawson's takedowns, and if he does get taken down, I think he can get back up, and the difference on the feet I think is going to be really serious. Ismagulov has stellar striking, so Ismagulov, I think he'll be able to get a decision win here. Probably won't put Dawson away, but it'll be really interesting to see what level of grappling Ismagulov is going to be at, and this is going to be a good test for that versus Grant Dawson. Finally, we have our main event. It is Sean Strickland taking on Abus Magomedov. Sean is the slight favorite in this one, with Abus coming in around plus 140. Abus has one fight in the UFC. He came in, KO'd Dustin Stoltzfus in less than 20 seconds, and there's nothing that Dana White likes more than sub 30-second KOs. If you do that, especially early on in your career, I think you're just guaranteed a main event spot. We saw it with Khamzat, although Khamzat obviously proved a bit more than Abus in just his one fight, but Khamzat had that quick KO over Meerschaert, and that just completely catapulted him to stardom, essentially. Magomedov is a really dangerous striker. He's got a good arsenal of kicks, front kicks, and definitely has more variety of striking compared to Sean Strickland. Abus did have a loss pretty recently in which he got KO'd, flat out by Lewis Taylor, I believe his name is. Let me check that. Yeah, Lewis Taylor just caught a left hook from hell and got KO'd within 30 seconds himself. So he certainly was getting a bit of redemption for himself, getting a quick KO over Stoltzfus. These are two of the bigger guys in the division. We've seen Sean just overwhelm guys in the past. He took Nasruddin Imavov on short notice and really dominated that fight. Nasruddin was able to keep it close early on, but Sean just overwhelms people with his cardio and just constantly throwing punches. You know what you're going to see from him. He fights kind of like it's a sparring match, just a sparring match in which he doesn't hold back, which from what it sounds like, he doesn't really hold back in sparring too much to begin with. So, Sean, the dude's just a gamer. He's just down to bang with anyone. And, Abus, I think he's very, very dangerous. And we've seen Sean be a bit hesitant against more dangerous guys. Like he had that loss versus Cannonier. I took Sean in that fight, and I had him winning that fight. But you could definitely tell that Cannonier's power was Turning Sean off a little bit Sean was definitely concerned with that, not as willing to, take a shot to give one as he usually is. It's going to be up to Abus to push the pace early, because the longer this fight goes, the more that just plays into Sean's hands. And I think if you're banking on getting a finish early, I think that's just not going to be the right strategy for you, especially when you're taking on Sean. So I'm taking Sean Strickland to get a decision win here. I think he's just going to put the pace on him, put the work on Abus for 5 rounds, pepper him up. Abus has been KO'd, so perhaps Sean could get a finish here, but Sean's really not a put you out cold type of striker. He's more of like a overwhelm you and make you give up type of guy. And I don't see that happening for Magomedov, so I don't see him getting KO'd. I think Sean's just gonna, like I said, left hand, right hand, that's all he needs. And I think he's just gonna march forward for 5 rounds, and Abus is just not gonna really have an answer for it. So, Sean, I'm always down for him winning, just to hear him say more and more out-of-pocket, ridiculous stuff. So I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot of that if he wins this fight. That is the breakdown. Thank you for watching. Like or comment if you feel inclined to do so. Later.